Have you ever wondered why love, something so beautiful and natural, can sometimes feel suffocating? Like a space that's supposed to be open and safe becomes a place of fear, anxiety, or emotional pressure. It's one of those strange contradictions of being human. We crave deep connection, yet we often struggle to stay whole within it. The longing for closeness can come tangled with expectations, control, or hidden wounds. So how do we break free from that? How do we love someone completely without losing ourselves in the process? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who reshaped the way we understand the mind, believed that real intimacy isn't about merging into someone else. It's about standing firm in who we are and meeting another person from that grounded place. In Jung's view, love isn't about two people completing each other. It's about two complete people choosing to walk alongside one another, fully conscious of who they are and who they are not. In today's world, emotional freedom might feel like a luxury, especially when relationships are often built on silent contracts of need and fear. But here's the twist. What if emotional freedom isn't just a relationship goal, but a psychological necessity? Without it, love turns into possession. Intimacy becomes surveillance. Passion gets replaced by obligation. Jung's blueprint offers a path to something better, a love that flows instead of binds. Over the course of this video, we'll explore how our emotional chains form, often without our awareness. We'll get into Jung's process of individuation and how becoming our true self actually unlocks deeper closeness with others. We'll also touch on shadow work, trauma, and the small practices that slowly, gently unhook us from patterns that no longer serve us. And the best part, none of this requires us to be perfect, just present and curious. You don't need to be a psychologist or a philosopher to understand these ideas. You just need to be someone who's loved, who's been hurt, who's tried and failed and still wants to try again. If that sounds like you, then you're exactly where you need to be. Let's begin this journey, not to fix anything, but to understand. Not to win love, but to free it. Understanding emotional chains. Sometimes we think love is supposed to feel a little bit like sacrifice. We believe if it doesn't hurt, it might not be real. But what if this idea isn't truth, but conditioning? Many of us carry emotional chains that we don't even realize are there. These chains aren't physical, but they shape how we love, how we attach, and how we respond to closeness. They can look like dependency, where we feel we can't be okay without someone else, or like possessiveness, where fear disguises itself as devotion. They often show up in the form of silent agreements. If you love me, you won't leave. Or if you care, you'll always say yes. Carl Jung believed these chains are tied to our unconscious mind. He taught that much of our behavior is influenced by unseen forces within us, what he called the shadow. The shadow is the hidden part of our psyche that contains the traits, desires, and fears we suppress. Not because they're evil, but because somewhere along the way, we were told they weren't acceptable. The need to control, the fear of being alone, the craving for validation. When these aren't understood, they get buried, and then they act out in subtle ways. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's what emotional chains do. They steer our love lives while we believe we're making clear choices. If you've ever wondered why you keep attracting the same type of person, or why arguments follow a familiar script no matter who you're with, there's likely a pattern playing out beneath the surface. Behavioral psychology supports this too. B.F. Skinner's work on conditioning shows how repeated experiences, especially in childhood, teach us what to expect from relationships. If love was inconsistent, we might develop anxious attachment. If love was distant, we might become avoidant. These attachment styles become chains when we don't question them. A fascinating yet underrated book that explores this from a modern Jungian lens is The Middle Passage by James Hollis. It talks about how most of us enter relationships with expectations we inherited rather than created. Breaking free starts with awareness. It begins when we realize that love isn't about fulfilling someone else's idea of who we should be, or even our own ideal of the perfect partner. It's about getting honest with the stories we've believed and asking if they still serve us. And when we start asking those questions, something shifts. Love begins to feel less like a performance and more like a connection between two real, flawed, evolving people. That's when emotional freedom starts to become possible. The blueprint of Jungian psychology. Real love, the kind that nurtures rather than confines, doesn't start with finding the right person. It begins with finding something far more elusive, yourself. This is the heart of Carl Jung's work, the lifelong journey of individuation. Unlike the ego, which seeks approval, comfort, and control, individuation is about integration, bringing the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves into alignment, so we no longer project our unresolved wounds onto others. It's not about becoming someone new, it's about becoming more fully who we already are. In a relationship, what often looks like incompatibility is sometimes just two unconscious minds clashing. Each person is projecting parts of their shadow onto the other. We don't realize we're doing it, but it happens all the time. A fear of abandonment might lead one partner to accuse the other of being distant. An unresolved wound around criticism might cause a harmless suggestion to feel like an attack. When we haven't taken the time to explore our inner world, we unknowingly pull others into our unfinished business. Individuation is the process of making those hidden parts visible, our needs, fears, desires, values, and choosing to own them rather than outsource them. Jung saw this as essential for emotional freedom. If we're not aware of who we are, we become entangled in our relationships. We confuse love with control, closeness with possession. We expect our partner to soothe every anxiety we haven't yet faced in ourselves. This isn't intimacy, it's entrapment masked as romance. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all." That loss of self is what individuation seeks to prevent. When we know who we are, we can bring our full, unfragmented presence into a relationship. We're no longer looking to be completed, we're offering completion. This concept is beautifully illustrated in the lesser-known book Romancing the Shadow by Connie Zweig and Steve Wolf. It explains how relationships are not just emotional playgrounds, but spiritual containers where our deepest work unfolds. True intimacy doesn't mean never fighting, never hurting, or always agreeing. It means showing up as our full selves and allowing the other person to do the same, without trying to change or possess them. When two individuated people love each other, love is no longer a contract or a need. It becomes an offering, a space where freedom and connection coexist without contradiction. That's the blueprint Jung left us. Not just for emotional freedom, but for real, sustainable intimacy that honors the soul. Clearing past traumas. If love feels heavy, suffocating, or confusing, it's often because something unresolved is whispering beneath the surface. Most of us carry emotional baggage, but few of us were ever taught how to open it, let alone sort through it. Unhealed trauma doesn't just live in our memories. It lives in our nervous systems, our reactions, our silences. and our sudden bursts of fear when love starts to feel too close or too far. It teaches us rules we didn't consciously agree to, like don't trust too much, or you're only lovable if you're needed. Carl Jung recognized that what remains unconscious controls us. He argued that unless we consciously face our pain, we project it outward. And in relationships, this projection can look like suspicion, detachment, control, or even excessive neediness. We don't mean to do it, but our nervous system remembers what we try to forget. That's why clearing trauma is essential, not just for peace of mind, but for the freedom to love without fear acting as the gatekeeper. Modern trauma psychology, particularly the work of Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk, shows how trauma imprints itself on the body as much as the mind. Van der Kolk's "The Body Keeps the Score" reveals how past emotional wounds resurface through physical tension, emotional numbness, or hypervigilance. And these states can distort how we interpret love. A gentle silence from a partner might feel like rejection. A need for space might feel like abandonment. When past pain colors present moments, we can't see our relationships clearly. Jung's concept of shadow work offers a powerful way to address this. Instead of pretending our pain doesn't exist, we bring it into awareness. Shadow work invites us to explore what we usually suppress: shame, anger, grief, or even longing. It's not about wallowing, but about reclaiming the parts of ourselves we've disowned. The book Meeting the Shadow, edited by Connie Zweig and Jeremiah Abrams, presents this process not as a chore, but as a necessary step toward wholeness. It reminds us that what we reject in ourselves ends up controlling us from the dark. When we begin to process these hidden wounds, our perspective changes. We no longer expect our partner to rescue or punish us for old injuries. We no longer need to armor up in every conversation. Love becomes less about survival and more about connection. We start to realize that intimacy doesn't have to hurt, that boundaries are not walls, and that safety isn't something someone else gives us. It's something we create within. Clearing trauma doesn't erase the past, but it removes the past's grip on our present. It's one of the most liberating things we can do, not just for ourselves, but for anyone who wants to love us. And when that weight begins to lift, we can finally experience love that feels light, honest, and alive. Practices for inner liberation. Freedom in love doesn't come from finding the perfect partner. It comes from building a relationship with yourself that's strong enough to hold you through the storms. That's where the real work begins, inside. Emotional chains are forged in silence, in avoidance, in years of brushing our feelings aside. So the process of breaking them isn't loud or dramatic. It's slow, intentional, and deeply personal. It begins with something deceptively simple: paying attention. Mindfulness is one of the most accessible tools we have for inner liberation. It's not about clearing your mind or escaping reality. It's about gently bringing your awareness to what's happening right now, without judgment. When you start noticing your thoughts, your emotional reactions, your bodily sensations in moments of tension or connection, you begin to see what triggers you and what soothes you. It's a shift from reacting to responding, and that shift changes everything. Jung emphasized the power of inner dialogue, talking with the different parts of yourself as if they were characters in a room. That anxious voice, the angry one, the inner child who still feels unheard. They all have something to say. And when you actually sit with them, not to fix them, but to listen, you begin to integrate them. You become less fragmented. This is individuation in practice, not an abstract theory, but a living process of becoming whole. Creative expression is another way through. Writing, painting, even speaking your thoughts aloud can help you access emotions that don't have words yet. One powerful method is stream of consciousness journaling. Just set a timer for 10 minutes and write whatever comes to mind. No filters, no censorship. It doesn't have to make sense. The goal isn't perfection, it's honesty. Over time, these pages reveal emotional loops you didn't realize you were stuck in. You might notice how often your thoughts circle around the need for approval, or how quickly you assume rejection. That awareness is gold. Because once you see the pattern, you can begin to choose differently. One lesser-known but profoundly transformative book in this area is Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors by Janina Fisher. Though clinical in tone, it offers practical strategies for recognizing and integrating the many selves we carry, some wounded, some protective, all trying to keep us safe in love and life. Here's a simple practice. At the end of your day, close your eyes and scan your body for tension. Ask yourself gently, where am I holding on? Maybe it's in your jaw, your chest, or your stomach. Breathe into that space and say internally, you're safe now. It sounds small, but the body remembers and it responds to safety. Inner liberation isn't about becoming fearless. It's about becoming aware. When you can sit with your own mind without running, when you can feel your emotions without drowning, you begin to free yourself from the chains you didn't know you were wearing. And in that freedom, love becomes lighter, fuller, and far more real. The role of self-awareness. It's easy to assume that problems in love are caused by the other person, what they did or didn't do, how they misunderstood us, or failed to meet our needs. But the uncomfortable truth is that much of what creates tension in our relationships starts within. Self-awareness isn't a trendy self-help idea. It's a foundational pillar of any healthy connection. Without it, we're essentially flying blind, reacting based on old programming, childhood wounds, or buried insecurities, and then wondering why things fall apart. Carl Jung didn't see self-awareness as optional. For him, it was the very key to psychological maturity. He described the self as a dynamic, evolving center of consciousness, one that can't emerge unless we're willing to observe ourselves honestly. This doesn't mean analyzing every thought or obsessing over flaws. It means having the courage to ask, why did that hurt me so much? Or, what was I really looking for when I said that? Knowing your emotional triggers is one of the most powerful gifts you can give to yourself and your partner. Triggers are like emotional flashbacks, reactions that are often disproportionate to the situation because they're fueled by past pain. You might get furious when your partner forgets something small, not because of the act itself, but because it pokes at an old wound of feeling invisible or unimportant. When you're not aware of this, the reaction can seem irrational. But when you are, you gain space. The space to pause, breathe, and respond instead of explode. Developmental psychology supports this, particularly the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth on attachment theory. Our early attachments shape how we relate to others, and unless we bring those patterns into awareness, we unconsciously repeat them. Maybe you learned early on that love had to be earned, or that vulnerability was dangerous. Those lessons stay with us, quietly scripting our adult relationships until we decide to rewrite them. A profound yet lesser-known resource that guides this process is The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. It explores how our inner chatter shapes our emotional landscape and how identifying with that voice keeps us trapped. Singer doesn't preach detachment from emotions, but encourages awareness of how we attach to thoughts that aren't necessarily true. To practice self-awareness, begin small. The next time you feel tension with someone, pause and ask, what story am I telling myself about this moment? Is it that you're being abandoned, disrespected, or not good enough? Often the trigger is less about them and more about an inner narrative that hasn't been challenged. The goal isn't to suppress feelings, it's to understand them, so they no longer hijack your peace. When you know yourself, love becomes a choice, not a compulsion. You stop needing someone else to complete you or validate your worth. You're not clinging to be saved or pushing away out of fear. You're simply showing up as a whole, flawed, evolving human, offering connection from a place of clarity instead of confusion. And when two self-aware people meet in that space, love becomes something entirely different. Not a transaction, but a reflection of inner wholeness. Balancing self and others. One of the biggest myths we're taught about love is that real connection requires self-sacrifice, that the more we give up, the deeper our love must be. But Jung, and many wise thinkers before and after him, challenged this idea. He believed that love doesn't ask us to shrink ourselves to fit into someone else's story. It invites us to stay whole while we share our life with another. Balancing the self with the other isn't a contradiction. It's a necessity for true intimacy. When you lose yourself in a relationship, it might feel romantic at first. You merge your plans, your emotions, your desires. You say yes when you want to say no. You overlook what hurts you because you think that's what love requires. But over time, that merging becomes a quiet erasure. And what's left is often resentment, confusion, or emotional exhaustion. Jung warned against this kind of fusion. He saw it not as love, but as an unconscious entanglement driven by unmet needs and shadow projections. Healthy love doesn't blur boundaries, it respects them. Boundaries aren't barriers or punishments. They're the lines that define where you end and another begins. Without them, we can't really meet each other, only versions of ourselves distorted through dependency or fear. Think of a boundary as a bridge, not a wall. It's what allows real connection to happen, because each person can show up fully without being consumed. In personality psychology, the work of Carl Rogers is especially relevant here. He emphasized unconditional positive regard, not just for others, but for ourselves. To truly connect with someone, we have to feel secure enough in our own identity that their needs don't eclipse ours. When both people are anchored in themselves, the relationship becomes a space of mutual respect, not silent negotiations. A beautifully relevant book that explores this is Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab. It's lesser known compared to mainstream titles, but incredibly practical in showing how boundary setting is not only a relational skill, but a path to self-respect. It reminds us that you don't have to justify your needs to anyone who truly loves you. Love that demands your silence isn't love, it's control. So how do we practice this balance? Start by checking in with yourself often. Ask, is this choice honoring me too? Am I shrinking right now? Am I saying yes because I want to, or because I'm afraid to lose them? These small moments of honesty build a foundation where both self and relationship can thrive. When two people commit not only to each other but also to their own growth, something extraordinary happens. Love no longer feels like a tug-of-war between closeness and freedom. It becomes a dance, fluid, respectful, and endlessly alive. And that's not just possible. It's the only kind of love that lasts without breaking either person along the way. Cultivating resilience in relationships. Love isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested in the moments when misunderstandings arise, when expectations aren't met, when old wounds get triggered and silence fills the room. That's when resilience becomes the quiet strength holding everything together. But here's the thing. Resilience in relationships doesn't just come from being strong. It comes from being real, from learning, adapting, and not letting past pain shape our future choices. Carl Jung understood that human beings grow through challenge. He didn't view suffering as something to avoid, but as a necessary teacher. In his writings, he often pointed out that it's precisely in our brokenness that we begin to uncover our true nature. So when it comes to love, resilience isn't about always being agreeable or staying positive. It's about becoming conscious of the patterns we carry and choosing to respond with awareness instead of reaction. Psychological resilience is the ability to recover from emotional setbacks, not by denying them, but by moving through them with insight. Viktor Frankl, another profound thinker who survived unimaginable loss, once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That shift, toward inner change rather than outer control, is the essence of emotional resilience. And in relationships, it's transformative. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies in neuroplasticity, like those led by Dr. Richard Davidson, show that the brain is constantly changing based on how we respond to stress. When we repeatedly practice emotional regulation, mindfulness, and empathy, we actually strengthen the brain's resilience circuits. It becomes easier to stay calm during conflict, to listen instead of defend, to repair instead of retreat. Real-life therapeutic experiences also tell this story. Take, for instance, couples in emotionally focused therapy, where the focus isn't just on communication techniques, but on identifying emotional wounds that fuel conflict. When one partner begins to see that the other's anger is actually fear in disguise, walls start to soften. Trust is rebuilt, not by avoiding pain, but by walking through it together. One lesser-known but profound book in this space is Love's Executioner by Irvin D. Yalom. It recounts his real-life work with patients navigating emotional entanglements and shows that healing is messy, non-linear, but always possible. Through honest confrontation with our own stories, we become capable of choosing love over protection, again and again. And that's really what resilience is. Not pretending everything is okay, but facing what isn't and staying anyway. Not because you have to, but because you've grown enough to know that rupture doesn't have to mean ruin. It can be a doorway to deeper connection if both people are willing to learn from it. When love is rooted in resilience, it becomes a place of strength. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but clarity. And that, more than grand romantic gestures or flawless compatibility, is what keeps a relationship alive. Techniques for deep connection. Connection isn't just about being physically close or talking every day. It's about presence. The kind where you're not just hearing the words, but feeling the meaning behind them. Where you aren't preparing your response while the other person is speaking, but actually absorbing what they're trying to say. Deep connection is less about constant activity and more about shared awareness. And this kind of intimacy doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design, by practicing skills that keep love alive and grounded in truth. Carl Jung once wrote that loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to us. That's a chilling thought. How many people are sitting next to someone they love, yet feel completely unseen? At the root of that is often a lack of genuine communication, the kind that requires vulnerability, patience, and mutual respect. One technique that creates this kind of connection is active listening. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary in practice. It means giving someone your full attention without interruption, then reflecting back what you heard. Not to parrot it, but to let them know they've been understood. So what I hear you saying is, that small phrase can shift the entire energy of a conversation. It slows things down and invites trust. Empathy is another powerful connector. Daniel Goleman, in his work on emotional intelligence, emphasizes that empathy isn't just about feeling what another feels. It's about recognizing their emotional state and responding in a way that honors it. That could mean sitting with their sadness without trying to fix it, or celebrating their joy without bringing in your own story. In those moments, you're not just with them, you're for them. Reflective conversations also build connection. These are moments where both partners ask deeper questions, not just, "How was your day?" but, "What are you needing more of lately?" Or, "What's been weighing on your mind that you haven't said out loud?" Questions like these move the relationship from surface-level interactions to soul-level intimacy. A lesser-known book that offers practical insight here is Hold Me Tight by Dr. Sue Johnson. Grounded in attachment science, it outlines how emotional responsiveness, being available, responsive, and engaged, is the real glue in long-term relationships. It shows how couples can move from conflict to closeness by tuning into each other's fears and longings rather than just arguing about content. Try this simple practice. Set aside 20 minutes once a week with your partner. No distractions, no agenda. Just take turns sharing what's been on your heart and listen fully, without offering solutions. Over time, this space becomes a ritual, a sanctuary where both of you can return to truth, especially when life gets noisy. Connection isn't about always being on the same page. It's about holding space for each other when you're not. It's about curiosity instead of judgment, attention instead of assumption. When these practices become habits, something beautiful happens. Silence becomes safe, conflict becomes productive, and love, instead of being a battlefield or a puzzle, becomes what it was meant to be all along, a place to be fully seen and fully accepted. Embracing emotional freedom and authentic love. Real love isn't about holding tighter, it's about opening wider. The kind of love Carl Jung envisioned didn't live in control, sacrifice, or silent suffering. It lived in consciousness, in choice, in a radical form of presence where both people could be fully themselves without apology. This is what emotional freedom looks like, not the absence of connection, but the absence of fear in connection. A love that doesn't demand your identity as a cost for intimacy. To love without chains means you no longer see your partner as someone responsible for fixing your broken pieces. You no longer offer affection out of fear of loss, or hold back your truth to avoid discomfort. It means you no longer confuse sacrifice with devotion. And most of all, you stop measuring love by how much of yourself you've had to give up. This freedom begins the moment you stop outsourcing your self-worth. When you recognize that the right relationship won't save you, it will reflect you. When you do the inner work, what you attract changes. You stop repeating the same painful patterns because you're no longer acting out old wounds in disguise. You know your value, you know your voice, and from that grounded place, you can offer love that is whole rather than needy. The ancient philosopher Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Emotional freedom isn't a gift from someone else. It's a practice, a choice you make in every conversation where you pause instead of react. In every moment, you tell the truth instead of pleasing. In every boundary, you honor instead of bending for approval. This entire journey, from becoming aware of emotional chains, to clearing trauma, to practicing conscious connection, isn't about arriving at a perfect relationship. It's about becoming the kind of person who can love without conditions, without projections, without fear. Someone who can say, "I choose you," not because they need you, but because they see you and they see themselves just as clearly. One final recommendation before we close. The book, The Eden Project by James Hollis, is a rare and profound piece on this topic. It explores why most relationships fail, not due to incompatibility, but due to unconscious expectations we never examine. Hollis encourages us to grow up emotionally, to love with eyes wide open, and to build partnerships rooted in self-awareness, not fantasy. So as we end this conversation, ask yourself, what emotional chains am I still holding on to? Where am I confusing attachment for love? What part of myself have I been afraid to show, even to those closest to me? And maybe more importantly, what could love feel like if it were free? If this video stirred something in you, share it. Reflect on it. Talk about it with someone you trust. And start creating a love that begins with truth, grows through awareness, and thrives on freedom. Because love, in its highest form, was never meant to cage you. It was meant to set you free.